In October 1907, the United States had no central bank, no Federal Reserve, no lender of last resort. When the financial system began to collapse, only one person could save it. Not the government, not the Treasury. One man, a 70-year-old banker, John Pierpont Morgan. This is an AI-generated voice. I am not a real person. That's important because we're about to discuss money, power, and the creation of America's central bank. What happened in October 1907 changed everything. Let's begin. The year 1907, New York City. The economy was booming. A new type of financial institution was exploding: trust companies. Trust companies looked like banks. They took deposits, they made loans, but they operated under different rules. National banks held 25% of deposits in reserve. Trust companies held only 5%. This allowed them to lend more, make more profit, grow faster. In the decade before 1907, trust assets grew by 244%. National banks grew by 97%. State banks grew by 82%. The trusts were winning. They financed stock purchases, they made real estate loans, they funded speculation on margin, and they paid higher returns to depositors. By 1907, the largest trusts rivaled the biggest banks. Knickerbocker Trust held $52 million in deposits. It was the third largest trust in New York. Trust Company of America held $60 million, the second largest. Charles T. Barney ran the Knickerbocker. His late father-in-law was William Collins Whitney, a famous financier. Barney moved in the highest circles of New York society. October 14, 1907, two brothers named Heinze decided to corner United Copper Company stock. The strategy? Buy shares aggressively, force short sellers to return borrowed stock, then sell at inflated prices. Monday, October 14th, Otto Heinze began purchasing. United Copper rose from $39 to $52 in one day. Tuesday, October 15th, he issued the call. The price hit $60. But the short sellers found shares elsewhere. Otto didn't control as much stock as he thought. Wednesday, October 16, United Copper collapsed to $10. The corner failed. Otto's brokerage declared bankruptcy. His brother, F. Augustus Heinze, was president of Mercantile National Bank. Another associate, Charles W. Morse, controlled several banks. All were interconnected. Friday, October 18, rumors spread. Knickerbocker Trust had been involved. Charles Barney was known to be close to Morse. People assumed Knickerbocker money funded the speculation. In reality, Barney had refused. But perception mattered more than truth. The New York clearinghouse forced Heinze and Morse to resign. Monday, October 21, the National Bank of Commerce stopped clearing for Knickerbocker. This was a death sentence. That same day, Knickerbocker's board demanded Barney resign. Tuesday morning, October 22, 1907, lines began forming outside the Knickerbocker Trust Company. Depositors wanted their money. The lines grew longer, hundreds of people, then thousands. Inside the bank, tellers worked frantically. They counted cash. They handed it to depositors. But the line never shortened. More people kept arriving. 2 van loads of banknotes were delivered to the Knickerbocker. Fresh cash to meet the demands. But even this was not enough. The crowd continued growing. Police were called to maintain order. People pushed forward. Some argued, some pleaded. Everyone wanted their money, and they wanted it now. Directors and officials of the trust forced their way through the crowd. They stood on the steps. They shouted assurances. Everyone would be paid. The trust was sound. The money was safe. Nobody believed them. In less than 3 hours, depositors withdrew $8 million from the Knickerbocker Trust Company. That represented most of its available cash. At 12:30 p.m., the doors closed. Not because the business day had ended, because the money had run out. Many depositors were still waiting outside in line. They would not get their money. That same day, interest rates exploded. Call money on the New York Stock Exchange jumped from 9.5% to 70%. This was the rate for overnight loans to stock traders. It was unprecedented. Other trust companies immediately came under pressure. If Knickerbocker could fail, any trust could fail. Fear spread like fire through dry grass. Wednesday, October 23, the New York Times ran a front-page story. It identified Trust Company of America as the next weak point. This was devastating. The article itself triggered a run. Depositors had withdrawn $1.5 million from Trust Company of America on Tuesday. After the newspaper article, they withdrew another $13 million on Wednesday. The trust held $60 million in total deposits. It was bleeding cash. The panic was now systemic. It was no longer about copper speculation or bad associations. It was about fear. Pure, irrational fear. Thursday, October 24, the New York Stock Exchange itself nearly collapsed. Without available credit, stock trading was impossible. Brokers could not finance purchases. Prices plummeted. At 1:30 p.m., Ransom Thomas, president of the stock exchange, rushed to the offices of J.P. Morgan. Morgan was 70 years old, semi-retired. He spent most of his time in his private library, finding. But when Thomas arrived, Morgan understood immediately. Thomas said the exchange must close early. There was no other choice. Without more credit, trading could not continue. Morgan was emphatic. No. Closing the exchange early would trigger complete catastrophe. It would signal total system failure. Morgan summoned the presidents of New York's major banks to his office. They began arriving at 2 p.m. Morgan did not waste time with pleasantries. He informed them that as many as 50 stock exchange houses would fail unless $25 million was raised. Immediately, they had 10 minutes. The bank presidents looked at each other. 10 minutes to find $25 million. It seemed impossible. But Morgan's intensity left no room for doubt. At 2:16 p.m., exactly 16 minutes after the meeting began, 14 bank presidents had pledged $23.6 million. It was enough. The money was rushed to the stock exchange. It arrived at 2:30 p.m., just in time to finish the day's trading. By the 3 o'clock closing bell, $19 million had been loaned out. The exchange remained open. That night, Morgan met with George F. Baker, James Stillman, and Treasury Secretary George B. Cortelyou. The next morning, the Treasury deposited $25 million in New York banks. John D. Rockefeller pledged $10 million more. Over the following days, Morgan directed the rescue. Between October 21 and October 31, the Treasury deposited $37.6 million total. Morgan's library became the command center, Madison Avenue and 36th Street. Friday evening, Morgan formed two committees. One would ask ministers to calm congregations on Sunday. The second would brief the press. By Sunday, November 3, the trusts were still struggling. Morgan summoned all trust company presidents to his library. Once inside, he locked the doors. Nobody was leaving until the crisis was resolved. Morgan informed them they must create their own rescue fund. They hesitated. They argued. Morgan sat in a corner, playing solitaire. He waited. Finally, around dawn, they agreed. Morgan unlocked the doors. The panic ended by mid-November. Interest rates normalized, the stock exchange stabilized, but the damage was done. Charles T. Barney committed suicide on November 14, 1907. He was destroyed by association, not wrongdoing. The stock market had fallen nearly 50% from its peak. Real GDP contracted by more than 10%. The recession lasted until June 1908. One man had rescued the entire financial system. Not the government, not the treasury. One man. And everyone understood the problem. What if Morgan had not been there? What if he had refused? What if he had died a year earlier? The entire economy depended on one individual. This could not continue. November 22nd, 1910, 3 years after the panic. Senator Nelson Aldrich arranged a secret meeting. 6 men boarded a private railroad car. They traveled under assumed names. Destination: Jekyll Island, Georgia, an exclusive club off the coast. Official story: duck hunting trip. One man borrowed a shotgun for credibility. In reality, they were writing the plan for America's central bank. Senator Aldrich led the group. Henry Davison from J.P. Morgan, Paul Warburg from Kuhn Loeb, also A. Piot Andrew, Assistant Treasury Secretary, Frank Vanderlip from National City Bank, Arthur Shelton, Aldrich's secretary. 6 men total. Is there any of the Hypo thoughts on Lake Gazia? They spent 10 days at Jekyll Island. They used only first names: Nelson, Henry, Frank, Paul. They did not want the staff to recognize them. If word leaked that Wall Street bankers were secretly writing banking legislation, the plan would be dead on arrival. The plan became the Aldrich Plan, published in January 1911. It proposed regional reserve banks spread across the country. Not one central bank, but multiple regional banks. In 1912, Democrats won control. They opposed Aldrich's name. The plan was rewritten, but the technical details remained nearly identical. December 22, 1913, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act. December 23, Wilson signed it. The Federal Reserve was born. Operations began November 1914. The Jekyll Island participants maintained secrecy for decades. They denied the meeting happened. Frank Vanderlip finally admitted it in his 1935 autobiography. The United States finally had a central bank, a lender of last resort, an institution that did not depend on one elderly banker. In October 1907, J.P. Morgan became the Federal Reserve. He showed what central banking looked like. 300 days of panic, 16 minutes to raise $23 million, 10 days on an island to write the future. That's the story of the Panic of 1907.